So I just finished filming this video, and I hope that it's everything you could expect it to be from clicking on the thumbnail. It didn't go anywhere I expected it to. I hope it's going to speak something to you, as well as be fun and engaging disc golf, even though I suck at disc golf. So continue watching for something great. Have you ever wondered, is God wrathful or is God loving? It's really confusing, and I think I can help you try to answer that for yourself. And we're going to play some disc golf along the way. Come on, let's go. Now, I know that's a really tough and dense theological statement, or question even, but I think it's important that I try and help you along the way and try to answer it for yourself. And I've also found that having mediums of like disc golf or something fun like that helps the conversation go and flow a little better for me and for you who's listening to this conversation. Now, admittedly, it's going to be a little one-sided, but I still want to help you discover that answer for yourself while playing a great game I love. So, we're at Pure Marquette Park in St. Genevieve, Missouri. This hole is about 250 feet. The basket is tucked right behind this tree. Nice little stable forehand. Oh yeah. That's perfect. Oh, kick killed me. So, I think the biggest thing you need to remember when you're asking yourself if God is wrathful or is God loving is why. I think that's a really big problem of why you're asking. Are you coming because you're upset at the world for life being harmful? Are you just confused about your view of God? And so I think you need to answer that question first effectively before you can answer the question, is God wrathful or is God loving? But I think ultimately the answer is yes. God is both wrathful and God is both loving in deep, condensing ways. And that's a really confusing answer and not the one you wanted. But we'll unpack that through these 18 holes. But it's important to understand that often there are times in our life, especially our theological or our spiritual journey, the answer is yes and. It's a mixture of the two sides. It's not just a pure one-sidedness. All right, first birdie run of the day. Oh, come on. No luck putting today. No luck putting today. That's what I like to call a birdogey. I just turned a 35 birdie putt into a bogey. Hole 2, it's about 350 feet, slightly uphill, but the hole's deceiving, so destroyer. Ooh, get there, please. That was straight nose down. I didn't throw anywhere but nose down. But we have a run. So for the wrathful part of what is God, I think, especially in the Old Testament, this is the prevalent theme, that God is wrathful. And so we see a lot of this with like Leviticus 10 is the first one that comes to my mind, Leviticus 10, 1 through 4. And so Leviticus 10, 1 through 4 is the story of God puts to death 2 of his selected priests because they don't worship him in the right way, or they do it in a wrong way. The scripture isn't clear how they do it wrong or why they do it wrong, but all we know is that they did it wrong. And so God has put them to death because of it. And it says in the Old Testament, like fire is used 6 times as a scene of wrathfulness. But in the Old Testament, 6 times God is using fire as a good way, as consuming fire, as like consuming or accepting something gratefully, or accepting a sacrifice gratefully or lovingly. So there's themes of this good and bad of God, or wrathful and loving God in the Old Testament as well. But another story that we see God's wrath is the Exodus. In the Exodus story, it's not as obvious as Leviticus 10, but there is some wrath that involves an Exodus story, and we'll unpack that after this putt. Edge 35 footer. See if I can get it in this time. Those putts were a lot better than the first putts. It's also like freezing cold out here. It's like 30 degrees outside, Fahrenheit, not Celsius. And my hands are a little cold, but we'll get over it. So in the Exodus, we see God play both the saving party and the vengeful party. We see God be vengeful to the Egyptians, God's not doing, like, God's not being all cupcake and roses with the Egyptians. God is punishing the Egyptians for poorly treating the Israelites, his chosen people. And so they go through that. They go through the series of being treated unfortunately. Here's my putt. I made it, that's a par. But the Israelites go through treatment of being saved from unfair punishment in a loving manner because God loves them and has chosen them. So God plays both these roles in the same story, and depending on your side, he exhibits the trait of wrathful or loving in a perfect manner. So how should we see God as modern Christians, or as atheists who are trying to understand who God is and why Christians believe in God? So how should we see God? How should we as modern people see God? In the Old Testament, like 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, God was mostly wrathful with a side of love. But then 2,000 years ago in the New Testament times, God is main course love with a side of wrath. So how should we as modern people see God? And like Jesus himself in the New Testament says, one, he claims that he is God, but then two, everything he does says it exhibits love, or he's doing it because he loves us. So how do we reconcile that? How do we find that? We have verses like 1 John 4:8 that says, God is love. And if we're loving as Christians or loving as people, we're exhibiting God to other people. And so we have some Christian groups who take that to the extreme, where they say that God is only love, and they deny the wrathful part of God. They just are willing to overwrite the Old Testament, saying, no, the Old Testament wasn't really that wasn't really God. It was something else. Where God is just pure love. Where then we have other people who are more willing to lean more towards the wrathful side and leave the loving side out. They're going to say, God is more wrathful than he is loving. Yes, God sent Jesus, and God as Jesus sent himself to save us on the cross, to atone for us, but he did that to rectify or to hold back the wrathful side of God. So how do we mesh that into a modern viewpoint? That's a tough question. How do we mesh God's wrathfulness and God's love? The two competing sides which feel completely opposite. How does one perfect being as God exhibit both traits perfectly? Hole 3, 250 feet, straight forward, Iron Samurai 4. After I figured out that this isn't overstable, it's actually flippy, I've been throwing this disc wherever I've been wanting it to. So I wouldn't be surprised if we have an ace run today. Try to put it in the basket. Let's get it. Get up, get up. Short, but workable, like 35 feet again. Putting again, edge of circle 1 again, another 33, 35 footer. See if I can get it. Wide, so wide. Find a point, find a chain, stare at it. Okay, I need to slow down on my putts. I'm rushing it too fast. I'm not slowing down to find a point to aim. I need to find one link of chain, just focus that. And then I can hit my putts after that. I have the form, I have the right zip. I just need to focus on what my aiming is. I'm aiming too big right now. So for me, when I'm trying to answer the question, how do we mesh the wrath of God and the love of God? The first story that comes to my mind is what I've kind of already talked about, which was the Exodus. But also another story that comes to mind is when Jesus is cleansing the second story that comes to my mind is when Jesus is cleansing the temple, or when Jesus is flipping the tables because he's mad. Why is Jesus mad? Well, he says because the people in the temple have used his house or used the temple to become a den of robbers where they're abusing, or they're abusing their power, they're abusing their money, they're taking advantage of people. But Jesus is exhibiting love in two folds in this way. But he's also exhibiting wrath. He's exhibiting wrath and anger on those who are abusing the poor and who don't have the ability to sacrifice. But then he's showing love to the poor and the people who don't have the ability to sacrifice by bringing down the price. He's flipping the tables, calling out the injustice, exhibiting wrath on the people who are committing the injustices, but then showing love to those who are experiencing or being affected by the injustices by bringing attention to it and calling an end. He's showing them love by saying, here's a way out of this injustice. that's how Jesus is doing both. He's perfectly meshing both. And I think the perfect word that comes to mesh these two is righteousness. Jesus and God is perfectly righteous, which meshes wrath and love. All right, MD1, I'm going to try for a straight shot. Maybe, if anything, a little bit of anhyzer. Let it coast down and kind of rest by the basket. This hole's tough because it's really like an inverted S shape, but I don't have the control to hit that shape right now in my bag. So MD1 back in. Get a good kick. Get a good kick. Please. Oh. Not a good kick. Not at all. Not a good kick. So righteousness. Righteousness is the perfect meshing of wrath and love. We see, like, this is a weird definition of righteousness, and it's not something you would normally encounter, but it's what God is. God is right. He is just. God is righteous. He's just. He's right and just. That's an improper combination or explanation of the word. But when you think of it that way, it makes total sense. Because God is righteous, he hates evil. He hates sin. Because God is just, he acts accordingly to each person. So if you consistently do evil and are an evil person, he gives you wrath. If you're someone who is needing love, he gives you love. He's perfectly meshing the two because he's God. He knows how to perfectly navigate that relationship. That's the thing we can't do as humans, is we're limited because we're not perfect. Because we're not perfect, we don't know how to perfectly mesh those two hard relationships. God can, though, because God is perfect. Oh, man. There's like a baby little line here. That's really tight. There's a little overhead here. Soft little anti-flick. I think that's the play. Little anti-flick here. Here we go. Another edge circle one. Whoa. With a crappy line. I think it's just God. I think this round's just been God telling me to practice edge one putts. Oh, come on. Both of those were on the die, just didn't fall. Okay, so I just said something very challenging, that people who are evil experience judgment, and people who are good experience love, or people who need love, rather, experience love. So that leaves a lot of us asking, why am I not experiencing blank then? If I'm so evil, why am I not being punished? Or if I'm so needing of love, why am I not feeling love right now? And I think the question I'd have to ask you is, are you looking for it? And that's a tough question in itself, because God doesn't answer things the way we expect him to answer. He always answers in ways counter to us. Like, all through Scripture, we see God works in ways counter to the way he was expected. The working through the lowest of the family. We see this through Abraham. We see this through Jacob. We see this through Joseph. We see this even through Jesus' birth himself. Jesus was chosen to live a lowly life. The royal scandal, as one of my professors say. He came as a poor person. Because he came as a poor person, he was a sexual scandal himself, basically. Mary becomes pregnant, but despite maintaining to be a virgin. How does that work? You can't rectify that. Well, God rectified it and worked in a way counter to what we expected. So are we listening to what we expect to be hearing, or are we listening to what God is telling us to? That's a question I also need to ask you about how we receive the love God gives us. Disking up here, it's about 250 again, but like 5 feet uphill. I'm going C-line FD1 again. Try to hit a nice little stable hyzer line and let it crash close to the basket, give us a putt. Whoa, spike hyzer. That's not what I wanted to do at all. So God shows us love in ways we don't expect. Another thing about God's love is perfect. And that's another really hard thing to comprehend, is that God's love is perfect. Because we as humans are so used to giving out imperfect love that we just expect everyone else's love to feel the same. But God's perfect love feels different. You see, all through the Bible, all through recorded scriptures, all through recorded history, anytime someone encounters even someone claiming to be a god or close to a god, they experience a change. And specifically with God of the Old Testament and the New Testament, that person experiences a positive or morally good change. We see Abraham he was Abram. He was a grief-stricken Iraqi with no hope for a future. He encounters God, works in God's glory, and becomes the father of many nations, with descendants numerous among the planet today who are still alive today. We see Gideon. Gideon encountered Jesus in a time where he was hiding. His country was subjugated. He was basically a slave in his own country. And yet, God used him to become a great judge, save his people, and changed him for the better to become courageous and knowing of his strengths. We look at the New Testament also with people around Jesus. Anytime Jesus is around a person, they change. Whether they're healed through touch, they're healed through word, they're healed through spirituality, like a demon is set free from them. The 12, Jesus' 12 closest people are all changed. Even Judas is changed. Like, Judas has this Judas Iscariot, for those of you who don't know, is the one who betrayed Jesus and got him crucified. Judas Iscariot is still changed. But while he's with Jesus, he refuses to fully accept what Jesus is telling him. He has a mental block that blocks him from fully accepting it. And so he's removed. That's why he chooses to go for the world instead of Jesus, because he's not fully accepting what Jesus is telling him, like everyone else around him was. But then the second Judas betrays him, he feels guilt. It says that Judas, with the money that he bought a land, and then hated the land so much that he gave all the money back to the chief priests, but they didn't want it because it was blood money. So they would refuse to take it because they couldn't put it into the treasury because it wasn't holy. So then he gets the money back. He still has his land. He's like, I don't know what to do. And he's so grief-stricken about what fully hit him, that Jesus really was the Messiah. Jesus was the person who was sent to the cross to die for us. He was the person that was prophesied for 1,000 years to come and better his nation. Judas is so taken back by this realization that he was with the person the whole time that betrayed him. What does Judas do? He lets his shame consume him. He let the world around him consume him, and he killed himself. Now, I'm not saying killing yourself is a holy thing. It's not. I think it's far from. But Jesus changed Judas. We can't deny that fact. Judas was changed from the time of when he was with Jesus and when he wasn't with Jesus. There was a process of change that occurred. There's a process of change that occurred with everyone that was around Jesus. Even when we don't see it in our own eyes, it's still there. And so because God's love is perfect and it's changing, God's love that's extended to us today in this modern era still changes us. But it's different than the love we experience in the modern era, because the love we experience is, oh, I'm just going to love you so you can go be happy. Oh, I'm going to love you so you can keep doing what you're doing, because happiness is love. Jesus tells us that happiness is not love. In fact, love is love, not happiness, not anything else. So the love that God gives us is perfect, and it causes us to change. Because changing to what God is, that's perfect love. Pushing people towards God, that's perfect love. Love requires you to change for people. Love doesn't give you the place to sit and stay stagnant. Love causes you to change. That's what true love is. And that's the love that Jesus shares over and over again in the Gospels. That's the love that God shares in the Old Testament. That's the love that God is going to share when new creation comes or when Jesus comes back. And that's the love that the church is trying to share, but we're so bad at sharing it. That's what needs to change. We as the church need to show what true love is and exemplify that in our own lives before we can show it to other people. Sorry, I didn't mean to get a little preachy there, but I was feeling I had to say it. We as a church need to be better at experiencing and showing true love, which true love requires us to change just as much as it requires anybody else to change. We need to be better about showing that. And so, here it is. Hopefully I'm going to change and make a putt to save my life for one time. Yeah, this is about like a 60 footer, really edge of circle 2. It's a deep putt. See how it goes. Oh, get in. It was like 15 feet short. So where was I going on that tangent? That true love causes us to change. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that we expect love to be in a certain way, and we don't receive that. We don't feel like we're receiving love. But love requires us to change, like I said. Here's my putt. I made it. I'm good sometimes within 10 feet. So love requires us to change. But there's an asterisk to that. That asterisk is that love requires us to change in a godly manner. That's a big asterisk, because if you're just to take the sentence that I say that love requires you to change, you could use that for all kinds of evil atrocities. I mean, that's what people who gaslight people do. You say, oh, if I'm good enough for you, you're going to change how you live just to fit for me. That's what people in a cult do. If you really love this God, you're going to completely change who you are, strip yourself of any identity you have, and then join me because you love this God so much. And I see a lot of accusations online that Christianity is that cult that tells people to strip themselves of their Christianity, to accept something completely counter to the natural order. But that's not what Christianity is. Christianity is something that is in the natural order, that was created by someone who created the natural order. Christianity is not calling you to strip yourself of your identity. Christianity is telling you to embrace it, but embrace it in a holy way. And there's a big difference between that, between embracing it in a holy way and just stripping yourself of it. All right, here's the line. Tiny gap through the trees. Basket is straight through to the other side. I can either hit this flat, or I can let it turn a little bit at the end, and it'll be basically parked. So I'm gonna go for a tiny bit of a flat to turn over with this Iron Samurai 4 again. Oh no. Throwing from the trees again. There's the disc. There's the basket. See how I work this way out. Oh, get through. And in fact, did not get through. Here we go, another up and over. Just trying to get out. Out of the trees. I said out of the trees, but unfortunately I lied. Pretty close though. Get up, get up. So, like I said, back to what I was saying, God's love is a love that requires you to change in a biblical or moral way. And that's the challenging part, is how do we discern what a biblical or moral way is? Well, we read the Bible. We see what the Bible is saying, and we take it in context. And that's another challenging part, is God is love, asterisk. God is a biblical love. That's the asterisk. God is a biblical love. And if we're not reading the Bible and understanding what a biblical love is, we don't know what love is. That's where it gets challenging in our modern context. 25 footer. Gonna run it. Dang it. Can't hit nothing. So now we have that established, that God is love in a biblical way. What about the flip side? Is God wrathful? And like I said, yes, God is wrathful. We see obvious examples of that. Any Baptist preacher will tell you that God is wrathful. But is that God's core trait? Is God only wrathful and uses love as a way to diffuse himself? No, I don't think so. I don't think that's right at all. Rather, I think God is love, and love is his core trait, but because he's also righteous and he's just, he has to deal with the unrighteousness and the unjust and the evil in the world with his wrath. So God is wrathful, but just same as love, God is love in a biblical way. God is wrath in a biblical wrathful way. And so we have to understand again what the biblical context is to God's wrath. Before we can make any claims about God, we need to know what he's claiming to be. And God is claiming to be both equal and part. He's claimed to being righteous. He's claimed to being just. And so we need to know the context of what God is claiming to be. In the cases of God's wrath, why is he wrathful? God is wrathful because he's giving wrath to those who are abusing those who need the love. Now, everyone needs love and everyone is sinful. God is clear about this in the Bible as well. But God is wrathful to those who he knows are unrepentful, who will never repent, like Sodom and Gomorrah, Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5. Ananias and Sapphira in Acts 5. Sodom and Gomorrah 18 and 19. But what I really love about Sodom and Gomorrah in 18 and 19 is God is exhibiting love through that. You say, how? God completely wipes out Sodom and Gomorrah. How was that loving? Well, if you go in chapter before, in Genesis 18, Abraham is having an exchange with God. What's the exchange? The exchange is Abraham bargaining to try and keep the city of Sodom and Gomorrah there. He's bargaining with Abraham because Abraham knows his cousin or his nephew is in Sodom and Gomorrah and doesn't want it to be destroyed because of his nephew. So Abraham is like bargaining with God, trying to bring down the number of righteous people so God doesn't destroy the city. God starts at 50 and then works all the way down to 10. And Abraham experiences God's love through that because God is offering a chance to the city. If I find 10 people in that city, I won't destroy it, God says. And yet God still destroyed it. Why? Because he didn't find 10 people who were willing to repent. In fact, when God went to the city, or rather his angels went to the city, what happened? The whole city came to Lot's house, threatened and started frankly breaking down the door and saying, give me those strange men that just came from out of town so we can have sex with them. That's the perfect example of unrighteousness, is trying to rape two men just because they're out of town. That is an example of God's wrath or God's divine punishment or God's judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. Whereas Jesus, it is an example of God's overarching and trumping love. I would say God is more loving than he is wrathful because he sent himself in Jesus to die on the cross, to die a sinner's death, to be fully human and fully God, come to earth, go through all the awkward stages of human life, being born, growing up, going through puberty, becoming a man, and then in his late 30s or early to mid 30s is when Jesus starts his ministry to save people. That's a big distinction. God took his time to show love, and he also takes his time to show wrath. But his love overcomes God's wrath because God is more loving than he is wrathful. At least that's my understanding of the scriptures. I think with Jesus is coming, that's the ultimate topping of that. That Jesus is always the exemplifying factor of God's ultimate love, trumping his ultimate wrath. God is more loving than he is wrathful. God is love while being wrath. Onto the throw, wild honey. This tree kind of makes it tough to get a solid backhand line out of it, but I'm going to try for flat. It's a little windy today, so I'm not going to throw flat. I'm going to throw hyzer, let it flip up and turn, and then hopefully come back. Wild honey. Great distance. Whoa! That's a bomb. Sheesh. That's probably the farthest I've ever thrown a disc. I'm gonna have to measure that sucker. So, God is wrathful, but his love trumps his wrath. And why is that? Because God is graceful and he's merciful. That's what grace is. Grace is receiving a gift that you don't deserve. Whereas mercy is not receiving a punishment which you do deserve. And so because God has so much grace, he has perfect grace. Because God has perfect mercy, he's willing to offer his son, himself, in Jesus Christ, to die a sinner's death, a death we deserve. In Romans it says, all have fallen short of the glory of God, for all have sinned. And so we all have sinned. And God, knowing this, knowing from the dawn of creation that man was going to sin, and Genesis 1, prior to Genesis 1, before God ever created, God had you on his heart. God had us on his heart. God had the earth. Every person that's ever lived has ever been on God's heart. And yet God still chose to create because he loved us all. Because he wanted to offer us mercy. He wanted to offer us grace. Because God's redeeming love is stronger and more powerful than God's wrath. Don't get me wrong, God's wrath is perfect and it's powerful because it's God. But God is more willing to offer love and grace and mercy than he is wrath and judgment and punishment, because he loves people and he loves us and he wants us to be with him. That's why he sent his son Jesus to die. All right, another birdie putt. You just said 419, so that's a bomb. That's the furthest I've ever thrown. So, like these bad boys. And hopefully for the birdie. And then we'll continue our chat. Oh my God. Can't make nothing. Continuing our chat. Because Jesus sent himself, or God sent Jesus to be that atonement for us, that was an example of God's love, trumping God's wrath. But because this is a free gift, we have the free will to accept it or not. And that's the tough part of the gospel. That's the tough part of rectifying whether God is truly love or God is truly wrathful, or if we're somewhere in between. Because God offers us this free gift of Jesus. But he gives us the option to either accept it or reject it. Because that's true love. See, it wouldn't be love for God to force us to choose something. Whether that action of choosing it would be glorious and giving us eternal life and being saved like it does when we accept Jesus into our hearts, or if that action of denying Jesus and rejecting Jesus causes us to spend eternity away from him, causes us to spend eternity in hell because we're living out the fulfillment of our choice. That's the tough part of the gospel, is we, especially as modern Christians or modern Americans, see hell as this eternal den of punishment that God puts us in because he hates us all. But that's not what hell is. Hell is escape. It's a place. It's a real place where real people are right now, where real souls are that have been and have lived. But hell is not there to punish us. Hell is there to give us the fulfillment of our choices. We have a choice in life to either accept Christ or to reject Christ. When we go to heaven and relive and experience new earth when Jesus comes back, that's the fulfillment of our choice to be with Jesus and accept Jesus into our hearts and to obey his ways. When we choose to disobey God's ways or Jesus' ways, and we choose to disobey or walk away or do anything else other than accept Jesus, that puts us into the camp of rejecting Jesus and rejecting God. And when we reject God and choose to live our lives by ourselves, then we experience hell. We go to hell because God created hell not as punishment, but as a way for you to see the fulfillment of your choice. Hell is the place where God is completely and utterly devoid. There is no love in hell. There is no joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control. None of those good experiential emotions are in hell because God is devoid there. There's no relevance of God in hell, and that's what hell is. Yeah, it's going to suck in hell. You're going to get punished, but it's not punishment from God. It's punishment from the people around you. It's the suffering from the people around you, realizing they had this eternal choice and chose the wrong way. That's what the gospel is. It's telling us to go this way because you're not going to like that way. Choose Jesus because rejecting Jesus is way worse. Choose Jesus because he loves you and died for you. Because when you don't accept that, you go to a place that's way worse than it is on earth right now. Even as bad as it is with wars, even as bad as it with persecution, even as bad as it with racism and stuff like that, it's always been on earth, but it's continuing now into the modern era. Hell is going to be 100 million times worse than that, and heaven is going to be 100 million times better than that. And that's the gospel. And that's how we rectify whether God is truly love or truly wrathful, is by finding the middle in that and realizing that God is neither both truly loveful or wrathful. I mean, I myself would say God is more loving than he is wrathful, but he's still both. I'm not rejecting the two sides of God. And I hope you can make that choice today too. Hole 8, I'm going to call it the last hole today. I'm tired, and you guys just got a full lecture. So, hole 8, straight down. I'm going to go Iron Samurai 4 again, try and flip it, get a good flip, straight down. Oh, too much hyzer. Should have thrown Origin. Watch. Origin's going to play the perfect flip play. as good as I thought it would have been, but way better than the Iron Samurai 4. Before I wrap up this video, I just want to say this is a big step out for me. This is something I've never done before, starting a YouTube channel by myself. Being vulnerable and talking about something that's most precious to me in the way of God, but also opening it up for everyone to comment, open for everyone to give their 2 cents, basically. And I'm excited to see where this goes. Because filming this video, well, even though I'm not done editing it, but I'm pretty much done filming it, I can feel something with this. The energy is doing something different. And I'm excited to see where this goes. Shot 2, glitch. Hopefully you can see. Oh, I juiced it. Too strong. It's a putt. Find your turn. So what did we learn in today's video? Well, we learned I can't putt to save my life. We learned that the answer to most theological questions is yes and. It's a combination of both answers. We learned that God is love, which is biblical love. We learned that God is wrath, which is biblical wrath. And I gave you a gospel presentation. I gave you a gospel presentation because I care about you, I love you, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Goodbye.